The following documentary deals with subjects that may upset certain members in the audience, as it presents possible interpretations of historic facts. The conclusions presented here are a matter of opinion. The evidence is real. In 14th and 15th century Italy, there lived a profound and original character. A man of uncommon intellectual and unparalleled creative daring. As a scientist, inventor and artist, he was ahead of his times, and, judging from many of his discoveries, perhaps ahead of ours as well. He was involved in many more activities than is known, and undoubtedly, his most hidden side was also his most interesting. A dark side with intriguing enigmas and dark revelations. A labyrinth that outlines the strange developments that signed the life of Leonardo da Vinci.
The many facets of Leonardo da Vinci are veiled in darkness. Strange searches, unspeakable cults, unbridled ambitions. A combination of elements that gives us an inkling about the real scope of his secret activities. A disparate world, unified by an underlying logic. His participation in secret societies, his exploration of the world of stars and the natural world, and his eternal pacts were all connected.
His relation with astronomy was probably due to three of his obsessions: darkness, light, and shadow. Leonardo resolved to study meticulously the position of the sun and the stars. This might have disturbed his collaborators. Now Leonardo was venturing into what was then called the terrain of the divine. A space ruled only by God and his angels. Using only his vision and an intelligence that even today leaves us speechless, Leonardo arrived at conclusions that, years later, would be reached by famous astronomers like Copernicus or Galileo Galilei. He who has beheld the sky once cannot cease to do so. Leonardo da Vinci.
Leonardo observed that the Earth and the Moon rotated around the Sun, and not the other way round as was thought at the time. Although today this may seem obvious, in those days this simple statement was enough to provoke a charge of heresy. Christianity maintained that God was the sole creator and at the center of the universe. Any other explanation clashed with the divine plan. For this reason, scientists spoke of their theories in hushed tones, like secrets that could not be confessed.
Like the moon, the Earth is one of the many stars that reflects the light of the sun. Leonardo da Vinci. Religion supported a geocentric model inherited from the Greeks, among them Ptolemy. The geocentric model asserted that the Earth was the center of the universe. The explanation was that Earth had been the planet chosen by God for the souls of men to find salvation. The cosmos was a vast stage where, through effort and pain, humanity could redeem itself. It was clear to Leonardo that the astronomical model that best explained the movement of the planets was definitely heliocentric. The idea that the sun did not revolve around the Earth, but that, indeed, just the opposite was the case, entailed a deep theological rift with the Church. The planet that God had chosen could no longer be at the center of the universe, but just another celestial body. This cast doubts on the description of creation as stated in the Bible, and, consequently, on the whole of Christian doctrine. The impact of Leonardo's revolutionary thinking is even greater when we recall what befell his contemporaries and even those who dared develop similar theories centuries later. Copernicus had to publish his discoveries posthumously and in Latin to avoid persecution. His book was banned by the Church. Galileo Galilei was persecuted, jailed, and forced to recant to avoid ending up burnt at the stake. And more than 100 years after Leonardo, the Italian philosopher Giordano Bruno was tortured, his tongue perforated with iron and his jaw sealed before being burnt at the stake for defending the same ideas as Copernicus, Galileo, and Da Vinci. Earth is neither at the center of the sun's orbit nor at the center of the universe, but rather amidst all the elements of the world. Leonardo da Vinci.
Europe was not quite ready for major discoveries. Those who wanted to study in fields that touched on the mystical had to keep quiet and stay in the shadows. In his thirst for knowledge, Leonardo became a part of this minority, and he knew, like everyone else, he had to be careful.
To avoid the persecution of the Church, those who decided to venture into knowledge were forced to create and form part of secret societies where they could carry on their investigations without suffering dire consequences. The first suggestions of a connection between Leonardo and secret societies appear in a pictorial work with an esoteric and oriental feel about it. This work, attributed to Leonardo, was painted at the Sforza Palace in Milan. It is known as Sala delle Asse.
The Academy was a spiritual brotherhood that preserved and guarded secrets of a scientific, religious, and spiritual nature. Becoming a part of the lodge was extremely difficult, as its codes and methods of security were quite hermetic. Joining required an arduous preparation and a rigorous initiation process. To be initiated meant having explored a deep spiritual path of sacrifice and meditation in order to reach higher spiritual states.
Etymologically speaking, to be an initiate means to be inspired, and more precisely, it indicates those who know how to be quiet, persons willing to know and keep ancient secrets, and to tirelessly deepen their studies. Once part of these societies, the initiates had access to revelations and truths kept for the chosen few. Revelations connected to the great mysteries of humanity. The path to initiation was represented by the image of the labyrinth.
Indeed, the labyrinth was the crucial test for reaching the center of truth, the heart of the Academy. Those who were able to get through had completed the initiation and were worthy to join this secret society. But those who entered this labyrinth had to confront a series of strange mental and physical trials and would never come out the same.
When Leonardo arrived in Milan in 1482, the city was in the process of becoming a great power in Italy under the control of the Sforza family. Leonardo would remain in their service for 18 years, until 1500, at the Castello Sforzesco, the hub of the court life. It was there that Leonardo developed his major works and legacy. There is a great deal of evidence that Leonardo had disciples in Milan. For them, he is likely to have written the texts that would be compiled in his treatise on painting, published in the 17th century.
Knots, lassos, connections. This peculiarity might account for the fascination he had with the arabesques he is said to have made at Sforza Castle.
The Sala delle Asse, which is credited to Leonardo, has all the features of a hermetic work of art, with its wefts conforming endless mazes. A complex network of swirls, a tangle of trees whose branches are extraordinarily and yet rationally interwoven. In addition to the knots of branches, there are clusters of rope which resemble those in other esoteric prints, especially those by German master Albert Dürer.
These curious patterns hide Eastern esoteric messages that cannot be deciphered even with all the information available today. The only thing we can be sure of is Leonardo's unstoppable attraction to the clandestine, the out of reach, the enlightenment at the end of the labyrinth.
The sects from Leonardo's times followed the methodology and structure of the Egyptian Hermetic schools, whose name comes from Hermes Trismegistus, the names that the Greeks gave to the Egyptian god Thoth. Thoth was the god of the word and magic formulas, that is, the god of knowledge. The term Hermetism comes from the name Hermes and is associated with the secrets that the initiated keep, secrets that they cannot reveal. The internal laws were rigorous, and initiates who broke certain oaths could expect to lose their lives.
Over the centuries, secret societies have changed their names and tendencies. Today we know a great deal about the Templars, the Masons, and even the Rosicrucians. But we know practically nothing about the Priory of Zion.
Its name was not heard openly until the mid-20th century, though its history goes back for centuries. The Priory of Zion is one of the great secret passages of the Leonardo da Vinci labyrinth. In him, we find no less than a Grand Master, leader, and guide.
What did this brotherhood believe, and why was it kept secret for so long? Does the Priory still exist? The scant information we have about this sect gives us a clue. A clandestine world whose laws might be as strict as the official dogma. What was the relationship between Leonardo da Vinci and the Priory of Zion? The connection between Da Vinci and this sect first came to light in 1975, when some documents were uncovered at the Paris National Library. These documents are currently known as the Secret Dossier, and in them the name Leonardo da Vinci appears as Grand Master, that is to say supreme head, of the Priory of Zion.
Those who doubt the truth of the Dossier Secret accuse three Frenchmen fascinated with mysteries of writing these documents and devising an enormous fiasco: Gérard de Sède, Pierre Plantard, and Philippe de Chérissé. One thing is for certain: the information held in these dossiers opened the gates to a compelling enigma and revealed the deeply heretical aims of the Priory of Zion.
How is it possible that Leonardo, often the official artist of the Catholic Church, could be the head of a heretical sect? If these documents were authentic, we would be before impressive evidence. Evidence, however, that we no longer find too astonishing.
It is impossible to speak of the Priory of Zion without mentioning the Order of Zion. The origins of the Order of Zion go back to the First Crusade. A group of Calabrese Augustan monks support the candidature of the Franco-German Duke Godfrey of Bouillon for the throne of the conquered Jerusalem.
The saga of the Knights Templar is one of the most enigmatic and exciting in the history of Christianity. Let's begin at the beginning. Our story takes us back to the 11th century, when in 1099, Pope Urban, heir to Peter in the incredibly powerful Catholic Church, took Europe to war, in an attempt to reconquer Jerusalem, which is in the hands of the Turks. Thus begins the period known as the Crusades, almost 200 years of war, during which Europe bled in an attempt to regain the Holy Land. Knights, kings, even children gave their lives out of blind faith. And what did they get for their efforts? A few fleeting kingdoms, the longest of which lasted only 50 years. This is where our story begins.
At that time, with the arrival of the Crusaders in Jerusalem, the Order of the Poor Knights of Christ, more widely known as Knights Templar, was formed. This was an order of warrior monks created by Frenchman Hugo de Pé and 9 other knights with the alleged aim of protecting the Christian pilgrims traveling to visit holy places. It is theorized that the two organizations, the Order of Zion and the Knights Templar, were closely linked at first. The Templars' luck lasted until 1307, when Philip IV, King of France, known as Philip the Beautiful, who 1 year before had taken the riches and property of French Jews to finance his debts and new crusades, accused the Templars of heresy, sodomy, and idolatry, unleashing a true manhunt. The King of France appropriated the wealth of the order, but he had to share it with the Catholic Church. Many Knights Templars perished at the stake after being tortured, including the Grand Master Jacques de Molay. Many others survived, seeking refuge in Great Britain and Portugal. It was in Portugal that they changed the name to form the Order of Christ. Although the Order of the Templars had been terminated, the secret, whatever it might have been, was still kept by its successors and survivors. It is believed that that is the real mission of the Priory and the Order of Zion.
For centuries, the Priory of Zion has guarded a secret so dark and dangerous that if verified, it would permanently change the essence of Christianity as we know it. An idea that threatens a crucial column of Christian doctrine and faith.
Many have speculated about the treasure of the Templars. Some hold that it was the head of Christ or of John the Baptist. This theory is supported by the declarations of tortured Templars, who confessed to worshipping the bearded head of an idol whom they called Baphomet. Others say that they kept the Holy Shroud, the cloth in which Jesus' body was wrapped before his resurrection. But the theory that has given rise to the greatest number of fantasies says that in the ruins of Jerusalem, the Knights Templar might have found certain documents that supports the forbidden Gospels and that gave another version of the life of Jesus. A version that would have shattered the foundations of the official church, an institution that was increasingly wealthy and powerful. A version that spoke of a marriage between Jesus and Mary Magdalene and went even further. It spoke of a child whose divine lineage would be enough to topple the temples once again.
In the version of events that the official dogma considered so dangerous, Mary Magdalene bore Jesus' child in her womb. The Priory's mission was to protect Jesus' lineage, which they claimed continued into the present day.
The Brotherhood maintains that, fleeing from the Romans and Pharisees, Mary Magdalene had landed in southeast France, pregnant, where she lived for many years after Jesus' crucifixion. One of her descendants, Merovech, founded the first dynasty of Frankish kings, the Merovingians, which ruled from the fall of the Romans until 751 AD.
It's just a hypothesis, but let's just imagine for a moment what would happen if Jesus had had children, and those children in turn had living descendants. That would mean that currently there's an almost divine lineage, the genetic map for the Son of God.
Marseille, on the southeastern coast of France, is considered the most esoteric region in Europe. There are recurring allusions to Mary Magdalene there. Indeed, there is assorted and proven evidence of her arrival. She is often represented in the names of churches, songs and legend. But above all, her name comes up in relation to the figures of the Black Virgins, who for many really was a black maid. Strangely enough, in this region, next to every black virgin, there is a mention of John the Baptist, the other biblical figure who is repeatedly and uniquely present in the work of Da Vinci. It is easy to observe how the famous gesture of John is repeated like an unmistakable sign of Leonardo's devotion to this saint, around whom several Christian sects were formed. After the destruction of these sects, hermetic societies were founded that defended the principle that John the Baptist and not Jesus was the true Messiah of the Jews.
The pieces of the puzzle are beginning to come together. An arcane sect, the Priory of Zion, a revelation, the lineage of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, and John the Baptist, the saint of the sects, a figure that Leonardo represented in all his religious work.
If it truly exists, a lineage of Jesus and Mary Magdalene could be devastating for Christian dogma as we know it. Jesus' direct descendants could demand to run the church. And if the church refused, believers themselves would seek them out. If this were the true secret of the Templars, the mission of the Priory of Zion, which Leonardo allegedly led, would be nothing other than protecting the life of the descendant of the Savior and transmitting it in code from one generation to another, like eternal guards of the children of God.
It's reasonable to assume that Leonardo scattered hidden symbols in his work in order to leave a sign of his membership, a sign addressed to the brotherhood to which he belonged, conceived so that only other members of the Priory of Zion would grasp it.
The list of people that ruled the organization includes major figures like Isaac Newton, the famous writer Victor Hugo, musician Claude Debussy, artist Jean Cocteau, and the painter Sandro Botticelli, a contemporary of Leonardo. The rest of the list consists of members of the most important aristocratic families in Europe, along with known alchemists and occultists. In our times, the leadership of the Priory of Zion has been assumed by a French citizen named Pierre Plantard de Saint-Clair. He claims to be a direct descendant of the Merovingians and to have in his hands the treasure of the Templars. Plantard and Saint-Clair, two surnames closely linked to the priory and to the region of France where the treasure of the Templars is said to be hidden. This is also the region where, strangely enough, one can find the Tour Magdala or Mary Magdalene Tower.
It is said that many of these families have a connection with Rennes-le-Château, a French village that belonged to the House of Lorraine, an old family of the Merovingian dynasty that fought to protect its lineage. There are those who assert that many of the names on this list were related, by blood or by friendship, to that dynasty. How did Leonardo da Vinci come to preside over such a distinguished and powerful sect?
Each Grand Master had direct contact, whether by blood or through friendship, with the Grand Master who had come before, and with his immediate successor. Once again, according to the dossier secret, Sandro Botticelli, the great painter, was the prior who passed the rule on to Leonardo da Vinci. They were not strangers. Botticelli and Leonardo had known each other for many years. In their early years, they had both worked at the same studio in Florence, the capital city of occult Europe.
Actually, Leonardo da Vinci was on a mission. The artist, inventor, musician, cook, philosopher, spiritual rebel had a mission, and much of his life revolved around that mission. For in his time, Leonardo da Vinci was Grand Master of the Priory of Zion, a direct heir of the Knights Templar, keeper of the true religion of Christ and Mary Magdalene, repository of the Holy Grail legacy. And although as an artist Leonardo could put on a disguise, he would never betray himself. And that's why the true story, his authentic faith, shouts out from all his work. Even though he might later keep his mouth shut and even deny it, what was said was said.
There are many symbolisms which point out that Leonardo formed part of secret societies that defended heretical ideas. We cannot leave out two examples. The absence of the famous Grail in Leonardo's Last Supper can be interpreted in symbolic code to mean that Jesus' blood is in another vessel, and that this other vessel is Mary Magdalene, who would be the female figure to the right of the Messiah, and who carried his regal blood in her womb. Royal blood, the eternal blood or Holy Grail. The chalice we do not see, but that Leonardo painted. Next, we have the constant and almost obsessive references to John the Baptist, the saint worshipped by sects and hermetic societies. Even in paintings, where there is no discernible reason to include the gesture of John, as is the case in the Adoration of the Magi. In Botticelli's work, we find talismans represented in the form of the concealed letters X, signs of protection and good fortune in hermetic circles.
When Botticelli died, Leonardo took over the leadership of the Priory. But the duo had already become friends before joining the secret society. Their friendship was sealed by a tragic and ridiculous episode, one that could quite possibly never be confessed, but one that made them into lifelong accomplices.
While still a youth, Leonardo worked as an apprentice in the studio of artist Andrea Verrocchio. There, he would meet Sandro Botticelli. The grandeur of Florence and its strange characters fascinated the young country boy Leonardo da Vinci. He spent his days in the workshop, surrounded by a motley crew of artists and wise men. Nevertheless, his restless spirit longed to meet more people and become familiar with more trades, to have conversations with all kinds of people. He also felt driven to increase his income, to free himself forever from his distant father. And so it was that in the early 1470s he worked nights as a waiter in the famous tavern The Three Snails by the Ponte Vecchio. But an unlikely event found him rising the ranks from mere waiter.
A new world opened up for Leonardo in the tavern's back room. An enthusiastic and open-minded, he quickly became an accomplished chef. But then fate opportunely played a deathly hand, and the future maestro was forced to use all of his creative powers in an unexpected and unfamiliar setting.
In the spring of 1473, death knocked on the door of the Three Snails Tavern. The victims were the tavern's three cooks. It is said that they had ingested a strange potion, but there was no further investigation.
Indeed, Leonardo's love of cooking even led him to open up a restaurant with an artist friend. The business soon had to close its doors when a nobleman was murdered on its premises, a common occurrence in a time when religion and money and magic and power were common fare at political banquets, and where dessert was often a drop of poison. But this was the Maestro da Vinci's world. He lived between the fire of the Inquisition and the poison of conspirators. He lived gracefully and without fear, and more than once he used food to gain friends.
Soon after he became head chef, Da Vinci began enacting changes. His aversion to the coarse dishes of the time would cause him to devise an original, almost strange cooking style. His dishes surprised and scandalized. However, his good taste was indisputable, and slowly but surely, customers succumbed to the pleasures of his experiments. Never without his notebook, Leonardo sketched what would become his first inventions. Curious gadgets like spits, meat grinders, and steam vents, which mechanized cooking. Accessories that today are found in any kitchen, but which, at that time, were viewed as impractical eccentricities.
His increasingly bold culinary experiments ended up irritating the regulars, and his eccentricity, combined with the death of the chefs, which had never been fully cleared up, created a halo of suspicion around him. And hence, to his regret, Leonardo was forced to give up his job at the restaurant known as the Three Snails, and was soon focusing exclusively on the world of art once again. But later, a chance occurrence would force him back into the kitchen again.
Sometime after Leonardo left the Three Snails in the summer of 1478, a fight among the diners caused a fire, burning the tavern to the ground. It was then that Da Vinci decided to reopen the tavern with Sandro Botticelli, his mate from the Verrocchio studio. They named it the Three Frog Insignia. Writings of the time, whose veracity is still debated, speak of a menu composed of exotic dishes like fish gelatin, horse soup, bear, and porcupine.
The crest of the Three Frogs proved too sophisticated for its times and soon had to close. But this experience of working in the kitchen affected Leonardo for the rest of his life. Though over the years he was praised and honoured for his artwork, he always happily returned to the kitchen, to the simple alchemy of pleasures that he found there.
By 1516, he was the most famous artist in Europe, recognized in all the royal courts and praised in all circles. His trips to the underground also brought him prestige and power. That year, the King of France, Francis I, invited the master to take residence in the Clou Castle near Amboise. Leonardo accepted and moved in with Salai, Francesco Melzi, his servant, and a couple of apprentices. It was certainly a splendid invitation, and it solved a number of problems for Leonardo. First, getting away from Florence, where he was already too well known. The city that he had loved so much now seemed hostile. Furthermore, being the honored guest of a king meant an end to his economic difficulties. But there was another reason. In addition to being an art aficionado, Francis I brought Calvinism to France and was thus naturally at odds with the doctrine from Rome. This probably provided Leonardo with the possibility of freely expressing his ideas without interference from the Church.
When Leonardo died in 1519, the Prior of Zion already had a successor, Connétable de Bourbon, to whom Leonardo had passed his mantle before dying.
As with the papacy, in esoteric orders control is kept until death. But unlike Catholic protocol, there is no conclave to choose a successor. The former master must choose the next great priors while alive. As with the occult schools in Egypt and Asia, this secret society stipulated the passing of rule from master to disciple to determine future leaders.
Leonardo spent the final days of his life far from Italy, in a peaceful and comfortable setting. He reflected on a fascinating life, full of ambitious goals that to a large extent he'd been able to achieve. He had questioned the laws of God, of nature and of art, and survived. But like all artists, he left an unfinished work. The final answer, the formula for life. What secrets did he take to the grave? How many did he leave behind to be deciphered in the future? As a visionary, what did he predict for the future? His final days attest to just how far Leonardo had come in his long life. Far from the humble village where he was born, that illegitimate child left this world, wrapped in riches and comforts, in a grand palace, surrounded by people of influence and nobility, who admired and looked after him.
They also say he refused to sleep, saying that it was too much like death. Oh, why will you not produce a work that, after your death, will provide an image of the perfect life? You, who while alive, become in sleep so much alike the gloomy dead? Leonardo da Vinci.
Cloak Castle was full of people who wanted to be near Leonardo. Artists from across Europe, sculptors, jewellers, servants, aristocrats, even breeders of exotic birds. But the artist preferred the company of his closest circle.
If you are alone, you are your sole owner. Leonardo da Vinci. Following the master's instructions, his assistants had to document every change they noticed in his health. The color of his skin, his posture, his mood. They had to record even the smallest changes that took place in his body as it wound down the road to death.
His obsession with science went beyond the human. Even as Leonardo experienced the suffering of death, he made sure that notes were taken on his physical deterioration and his changing moods. Perhaps he was attempting to make himself into the object of his own study, and thus elude fate.
Days before his death, Leonardo called upon a notary, with whom he drew up his will and left precise instructions regarding his funeral. Strange conditions and elaborate arrangements were demanded meticulously, as if death were the last great mystery which he was finally approaching.
In the will that Leonardo wrote with his notary, he left all the money that he had deposited at the Ospedale Bank in Italy to his half-brothers. The belongings that he had in the castle, which included some manuscripts and some pictorial works, he would leave to his faithful assistant, Melzi.
His vineyard in Milan went to his assistant Salai and his servant Battista. For his servant Mathurin, he leaves some coats and money, and saw to it that gold was handed over to 62 Ambrosian beggars. He also requested that 60 of them carry a torch during his funeral. As part of his final mystical master plan, Leonardo even documented the number and weight of the candles that would burn at Mass the day of his burial. The old artist staged a truly grand event for the final celebration of his life.
We will never know for sure whether these requests were part of a plan to gain access to the afterlife. Perhaps he had an unspeakable theory about the soul's passage. We'll never know. There is, however, something in his final works that makes us shudder.
It is said that Leonardo spent his last days in France, dedicated to his manuscripts, correcting and modifying old texts, penning here and there new thoughts and old dilemmas. It is during this time that his sketches of the end of the world were made. Perhaps as a result of his feverish visions, Da Vinci drew an apocalyptic world where enormous floods left a wake of destruction. Forests, cities and knights all ended up buried under a watery torrent. One interesting detail about the natural phenomena in these nightmarish, hallucinatory sketches is the departure from the master's lifelong obsession with detail and spontaneity. With his last breath, the master made confession before a priest who absolved him and gave him communion. With his remaining strength, Da Vinci rose from his deathbed to accept the host. He was unable to stand up without the support of his assistants. They say that in his confession, he asked for forgiveness for not having produced art according to convention.
Asking for forgiveness on his deathbed and the confirmation that his work had not been carried out as agreed are just two of the things that make us suspect something. Perhaps he was referring to the time he took to make his work, or perhaps something entirely different. We will never know.
At the time of his death, Da Vinci had 3 works with him: St. John the Baptist, St. Anne, and that famous portrait of the smiling woman that some claim is the true Gioconda. This choice was by no means arbitrary.
Why these pieces, not others, were hanging before him at the time of his death is another mystery that he took to the grave.
These paintings would act as his final message, passing on his beliefs for posterity. John, the saint of the secret societies; St. Anne, the figure of the Great Mother; and the Gioconda, this androgynous image, as enigmatic as he himself.
Leonardo da Vinci died with dignity and without show. But of course there is one final mystery surrounding his death: the fate of his mortal remains. There are many differing theories about what happened to Leonardo da Vinci's body.
The labyrinth of the master's life reached its end. His disciples, followers, students and successors probably didn't have Leonardo's shrewdness when it came to studying and passing on secret knowledge. And centuries had to go by before, through Leonardo's work and its secret science, we could begin to get a glimpse at the secrets so jealously guarded by the Templars, Priors, and other mysterious sects.
His life's curtain fell on French soil, and beyond that curtain, eternity. Finally, Leonardo would come to know what lay beyond life. Reclining in his chambers in Clou Castle, with no natural heirs and his will in order, Leonardo had time to prepare his mind for the great passage.
Attempts at flight, his hidden relations, secret rituals, unfinished work. A work of art he would never make. All that was behind him, in his past. Before him, the window on the night, the vastness of the French sky, the glimmer of the stars which he always dreamed of reaching. Those stars that now approached him with a new glow. And Leonardo felt light, so light.